Did the Prime Minister need to invoke the Emergencies Act to stop the convoy, the so-called Freedom Convoy? That is, of course, the big question that politicians and Canadians could finally get answered when Justice Paul Rouleau's much-anticipated report is released tomorrow. I want to find out what our front bench panel of former premiers is watching for when that report is released. Let's bring them in now. Joining me this evening, former BC Premier Christy Clark. She's now a senior advisor at Bennett Jones. Former Ontario Premier Kathleen Wynne, she's now a professor at the University of Toronto's Victoria College, and former Nova Scotia Premier Darrell Dexter. He's now Vice Chair of Global Public Affairs. Hi, everybody. Great to see you this evening. Darrell, I'm going to start with you. I think there's sort of a political way to look at that question, and then also from a policy perspective. I want to start off on the politics. Do you think, I'm not sure how extreme anything is going to be presented tomorrow, but do you think what comes of tomorrow will ultimately sway public sentiment around the federal government's actions here one way or the other, or do you think those sentiments are kind of baked in by this point?
Yeah, I think by and large, I think they are baked in, and I think if you try to think back to that point in time, there was tremendous frustration, not just by those people who were affected in and around Ottawa or the other parts of the country, but just kind of generally this feeling that people, have a right to feel safe and secure in their own communities, and that wasn't happening. And I think people felt something did have to happen. Now, whether or not the kind of tests under the Emergency Act were actually met, we'll see when the report comes out tomorrow. But I really believe that it to some extent this does show kind of the divide in the country. I think if you were kind of a center left on the political spectrum, you probably agree with the actions of the government, and if you're on the center right, you probably disagree with it. But I think the large majority of Canadians felt something just had to happen, and this was the best tool available for the government at the time.
Yeah, I guess what I'm wondering, Christy, is even if, for example, they come out tomorrow and say the legal threshold was not met, I think there are certainly big policy consequences, and in most circumstances there would probably be a lot of political consequences to that too. But given the way it all unfolded and sort of that it took 3 weeks for it to actually stop, do you think that the political implications will be muted at all, or do you think there's a chance the Liberals could be impacted by this? I think you're on mute.
There we go.
There we go.
Rookie mistake. Pre-pandemic mistake.
It's all good.
I agree with Darrell. I do think that it will be muted because people have moved on. The federal government got the thing done and over with, and I think what's kind of the inconvenience and the sense of crisis is in the past. People's opinions about these things kind of soften. I do think, though, that from a policy perspective, the government is likely to have its wrist slapped for some. I mean, there's no doubt they overreached in this. I mean, interfering in people's ability to, access their bank accounts and things like that. That was way, way overreaching. They didn't do a perfect job. But I can tell you, when leaders are in the midst of a crisis, they don't always get it right. So I think what the report will show us probably is where they got it right, where they got it wrong. They got a lot wrong. They got the thing done, though, and out of the way eventually. And I think people have sort of moved on. So I think the political impact from it will be, as you say, Vassy, muted.
Your sense of that, Kathleen, and then also on the policy question, I think there will be stuff that comes out that says, okay, the threshold here, X, Y, and Z was not met. Is it incumbent on the government to change the law basically going forward, or look to, I guess, reflect whatever the justice says?
Yeah, well, I think the report will be received on a bunch of levels, Vassy. I think that the general public will, I think, react the way Darrell and Christy have said, that, they've moved on. There was a confluence of events that meant that something had to happen. it wasn't, it wasn't getting done, and it needed to get done, and so that's where Trudeau's government had to act. But I think they're going to be, as the minister said, there are going to be lessons from this. I mean, that's why this is an important process. And I worry that it's not just about the federal government; it's the coordination of all of the responses that I think really broke down. That's my opinion. We'll see what the report says, but I think there was a lack of communication and a lack of coordination from which we have to learn. And whether that means changing legislation, whether it means changing communication avenues, I don't know. But those things have to be taken as lessons from the report that comes out. But I don't think this is going to have a huge impact on the government. I think most people, and I think there's polling that shows that most people believe that something had to be done.
I wonder, sort of on the converse, Daryl, if usually if we're talking about the economy, it's advantage Pierre Poiliev. If we're talking about the convoy, it's disadvantage Pierre Poiliev. He has sort of navigated his way through it to some degree, but I'm wondering if you think this is, I mean, it's a Friday, so we traditionally, that's where you dump some news, but if it stays in the news cycle for a while, is that still to his detriment?
Yeah, no, I don't think. Like I say, I think people, and as was noted by Christy, I think people just kind of generally have moved on from this, and I think that works both ways, both for the government and for the opposition. I think very much that but at this point, there's lots of other meat out there for the opposition to be digging in on, and this one doesn't necessarily kind of meet the bar in terms of scoring any kind of real political points. I think the key that everyone acknowledges here is that there was a system failure of some kind that was taking place at the time that needed to be addressed. And the nitty-gritty of all of how that happened, at this point, I don't think people really care about. It did get resolved. Yes, there will be some lessons that were learned. That's why the legislation requires there to be an inquiry kind of after the fact to look back at these things. That process, it was wise to put that process in place originally. It's going to take place. Some lessons will be learned. And I think just generally, whether it's for the opposition or the government, people will now move on.
Just a quick point to jump off of both Kathleen and Daryl's, and last word to you, Christy. Even if people move on, I think Kathleen's point is a good one in that there was a lot that came to light here about what didn't work, from policing to communication between levels of government, like some pretty serious stuff that if there were to be a crisis in the future and things kind of carried on status quo, could be to all Canadians' detriment. I know people have moved on. Does that mean the pressure is off, though, those institutions to rectify some of the glaring, kind of the glaring failures on their part?
Well, I think yes and no to that. The pressure should be felt, whether or not they're capable of actually fixing any of these problems while they're busy, actually doing all the rest of the stuff that they do every day in law enforcement is yet to be determined. We still have a new RCMP commissioner about to be named. The RCMP has really struggled to be accountable and to meet, I think, the highest levels of standards in policing in the last few years. So I don't know that they're actually going to be able to fix any of this stuff. I will just finish with this, though, Vassy. The report is really important because even though if people have moved on, as citizens, we should be intimately concerned about government taking away our freedoms in a society that we regard as one of the freest in the world. And I think that the way the government overreached on this, using a sledgehammer when they could have used something much lighter to try and resolve the problem, is something that really does deserve scrutiny. And I hope the report does garner some more discussion than any of us are so far appearing to expect.
Well, hopefully, yeah. Their contention is obviously that was the sledgehammer available to them. But yeah, we'll look to see what tomorrow's report brings us.